every armor is going to be a mix of metal and leather. Plate armor still has leather straps, and leather armor is still hardened boiled leather, so you're still likely using some metal to bind the pieces together. Now when I see the words made of metal, I see a big difference between that and contains metal. Plate armor may have straps, but it's clearly made of metal, or at least primarily of metal. Studded leather may have metal studs and rivets, but I would say it's still clearly made of leather, or at least primarily of leather. So can a druid wear armor if it contains metal at all? It seems that the intent of the designers is that if it has a little bit of metal, that's not a problem. Chris Perkins says that studded leather doesn't count as metal armor in his game, and if we look at Sage Advice, we can see that studded leather armor is considered to be a standard armor for druids. I think the most reasonable answer is that if the armor or shield is made primarily of metal, it's prohibited. Otherwise, you're okay. I can't guarantee, though, that's how it's going to be seen at every table, including the table of Chris Perkins. But I do think it's the most reasonable answer, and when I do these ratings, I need to make an assumption there, and that's the assumption I'm going to make. That's when we get back to shields, because if a shield needs to be primarily metal for it to be prohibited, we really should be okay for 99% of shields. Historically, we see shields, even for the metal armor-clad knight, that are primarily made of wood. They may have metal rim, they may have metal boss, but the lion's share of the shield is still wood. And when we see a shield standard weight of 6 pounds, I think that makes it pretty clear that it's not a huge slab of steel. So when a magical shield becomes available, I would expect, at least in most cases, we should be okay. So what I would assume is the standard armor set of a druid would be studded leather and a shield. And if we mix that with, say, a 16 dexterity, which is very achievable right from first level, that's a base 17 armor class, which frankly is going to be as good or better than your standard fighter, because more often than not, fighters don't wear shields. So this whole metal armor thing really isn't the end of the world. We can still sport a pretty decent armor class, probably one less than the standard cleric, but more than any other full caster at level 1. The difference is the shield. The shield makes a difference. 2 armor class is a pretty big deal. Where I think this hurts most for us, though, is with multiclassing, because that prohibition will trump whatever proficiencies we get with armor. That means we aren't going to see much in the way of druid dips on optimized builds, except sometimes 2 levels of Moon Druid, which we'll talk about more later. The most iconic ability for druids is Wild Shape. This is gained at level 2, and technically it does scale with our level, but that scaling is minimal, and it caps at level 8. What I find is, without any subclass boosts, Wild Shape is of minimal value in combat right at level 2, and by level 5 it is totally obsolete. The main value of Wild Shape ends up being utility, and this is usually turning into something that would otherwise normally not attract attention, like a spider or something, or maybe getting a movement mode you normally wouldn't have, and then using it for scouting. At level 8, we can take flying forms, allowing for improved scouting options. And this meant generally, Wild Shape occasionally had a use, but with 2 uses per short rest, most of the time it would not get used. That's changed with Cash's optional class features, because now we can spend a Wild Shape and cast a Find Familiar spell without a material component. But unlike the normal spell, which basically lasts indefinitely, ours has the same duration as our Wild Shape would have had. Still, Familiars are useful, and they can be useful in combat as well, so at least all Druid subclasses will have some way to get some use out of their Wild Shape for both uses per short rest. After Wild Shape, there really isn't much in the way of class features beyond spellcasting. A couple things at very high level, but mostly it's spells and Wild Shape for Druids. So let's talk about how good a spellcaster a Druid is. Our casting is wisdom-based, and we have preparations of our Druid level plus our wisdom bonus. This is about the same as a wizard, better than a sorcerer, but significantly less than a cleric. We have cantrip casting, but we only get 2 cantrips to start, and we max out at 4 cantrips at 10th level. This makes our cantrip selections pretty tight, especially considering the Druid cantrip list has a fair number of interesting options. Druids are ritual casters, and although they're not supporting the best ritual spell list, standards like Detect Magic, Water Walk, and Water Breathing are available. Commune with Nature is actually quite a good ritual, and not available to other ritual casters. And Tash has added Augury and Divination to their spell list, which gives some other good options. Like clerics, a druid can change out their preparations with a long rest, and then choose any spells from their spell list. Unlike clerics, I actually see druids taking advantage of this feature more often, and I think it has a lot to do with the spell list itself. So let's talk about that. I've heard from several players in online discussion that the druid spell list is really about conjure animals, and if a DM wasn't to allow conjure animals, which I've seen on multiple occasions, usually due to having 8 creatures suddenly pop up in a battle, slowing down gameplay and being cumbersome, they see no reason to play a druid. Personally, I see much more to the druid spell list than I think they do. The strengths of a druid spell list include summoning, definitely, and conjure animals is the premier option for summoning. But there's some other really good summon options available as well. Summon Beast is a great spell for 2nd level, and Conjure Elemental is a strong 5th level option, and we have some decent options in between as well. Even without conjure animals, druid's ability at summoning is competitive with any other class. Another area where the druid spell list is very strong, and I mean even arguably the best, is battlefield controlling. From level 1 spells up, we see many of the best battlefield control spells in the game, from Entangle to Sleet Storm to Wall of Stone and Transmute Rock. When it comes to healing spells, I would argue that druids actually have the best spells in the game. Going from Goodberry, which is probably the best 1st level healing spell, to the various restorations, Revivify, which is the best raised dead option, Heal, which is the best mid-combat heal before 9th level spells, and more. Even after the Healing Spirit errata that nerfed it to below average for a healing spell, if healing is what you want to do, Druid remains a strong choice. If you want to do blasting, Druid's not your best option, but there are some at least okay area of effect blast options, certainly more than a cleric or a bard. However, there are 2 gaps in Druid spellcasting that prevent it from being top tier. The first is defensive options. There's a few in there, like absorb elements and protection from poison, but significantly less than wizards or sorcerers. The other main gap I see is in mobility spell options. No fly, no misty step, no dimension door, no thunder step, and no really good alternates to those spells either. Our first major mobility option is Tree Stride, and that's a 5th level spell, and as the name implies, requires trees. Windwalk is our first real fly spell, and that's 6th level. So it's not that there's no options, but they just aren't as good, and they come on, like, way later. So the spell list for druids is a mixed bag. They are really good at a number of things, more than just summoning, and there's also some gaps you're absolutely going to feel. So the druid spell list is somewhere in the middle. I would say it's better than clerics, and it's likely better than the bard spell list as well, at least before magical secrets comes into play, and probably better than warlocks too. Though bards and warlocks, I'd say that's debatable, but their spell list is not in the realm of wizard spell list or even sorcerer spell list. So druids on their own are a middle-of-the-road full caster with Wild Shape and their unique armor situation. A druid gets their subclass at level 2, which is earlier than some. Let's see what the subclasses offer. So druids get their subclass features at levels 2, 6, 10, and 14. 14 is really late in gameplay, so I'm not really going to talk about those. 10th is fairly late as well, but it should still find a chance to exist at least near the end of most full campaigns. So, hey Optimancers, Chris here. In this series I've been discussing the ranks of every subclass in the game, and no really good alternates to those spells either. Our first major mobility option is Tree Stride, and that's a 5th level spell, and as the name implies, requires trees. Hey Optimancers, Chris here. This is my second video for the ranking of all 114 official subclasses in the game. In the first video I discussed the Artificer subclasses, and now we're moving on to the Barbarian. If you Hey Optimancers, Chris here. Monks. Where do I begin? I guess at the beginning. First, our class features include D8 hit points, which is middle of the road. No armor proficiency. This is the only non-caster in the game without an armor proficiency. And don't give me an armored defense. Barbarians have unarmored defense, and they still get armor proficiencies that they could use if they wanted to. Monks don't. We get simple weapon and short sword proficiencies for saving throws, dexterity and strength, and the standard 2 skill proficiencies with 6 options. At first level, we get unarmored defense, which means our armor class is going to be 10 plus our dexterity and wisdom modifiers. This usually means around a 16 armor class, which isn't terrible to be honest, but it is not strong. Being forced into this means we're never going to benefit from anything like magical armor either. You can eventually get your armor class up to 20 through this, as long as you don't want feats or anything. So our monk obviously needs unarmored defense, but it's probably just worse than if they could wear armor. We also get martial arts, which does a few things. First, they make sure you aren't accessing armor through any means by restricting this to monks that aren't wearing armor. Our weapon use is also restricted. In order to benefit from this. Though it is less restricted than it used to be, basically we're not able to use this feature with weapons with special or heavy properties. This was more limited before Tashes, and technically now we're limited to one weapon at a time that didn't qualify before, but that's really not a big deal. But as long as we're using a qualifying weapon, we can use our dexterity instead of our strength for attack rolls and damage, and when you take an attack action with that weapon, you can make a bonus action attack with an unarmed strike. We can also use the monk weapon damage die instead of the normal damage die in our unarmed strikes and monk weapons. This is not a good feature. The die is a D4, so we can swing our longsword for D10 damage, or by accessing our martial arts feature, we could use a D4 instead. But it does scale, so eventually, and I mean at high levels, you could replace that longsword D10 with a D10. Even if you're using a weapon with lower damage die, like a hand crossbow, then you still have to wait until level 11 until you would see any benefit from this at all, and even then, it's really marginal. So the only really substantial benefit of the martial arts die at all is making sure at least our unarmed strikes do some damage. But a D4 plus dexterity, it's not a lot. Perhaps the biggest problem with martial arts is this is all a monk gets at first level, unless you consider the prohibition against wearing armor a feature, and to make use of this feature, we are forced into melee. This is with a class that can't wear armor, doesn't have a strong armor class, and doesn't have a lot of hit points. Oh, and can't take advantage of the Great Weapon Master feat since they can't use heavy weapons, so we can be certain our attacks will never deliver much damage. At second level, we get our key feature. This gives us 2 key points that we can spend, and they're recovered on a short rest. At second level, we have 3 options to spend this key. First, we can spend it to get 2 unarmed strikes as a bonus action. Like with martial arts, this requires we use the attack action first. Now, this isn't 2 extra attacks. This means instead of the bonus action unarmed strike that we were getting for free through martial arts, we get 1 additional unarmed strike for 1 key point. So 1 key, and we're probably looking at about 6 additional points of damage if we hit. Probably about 4 points of damage on average if we take our chance to hit into account. So if we use up our key exclusively on this, we can probably do about 8 points more damage per short rest total. Secondly, we can use a key to take a dodge action as a bonus action. Remember that our martial arts attack uses a bonus action, so if we use this, we lose an attack in addition to having to spend the key. But I will say, this does really boost our defense by a lot. But it is just twice per short rest, at least at level 2. And if we do that, then we're not doing anything else with our key. And we're going to have trouble doing anything with much impact since we're not using martial arts bonus action attacks on the rounds we use this. Finally, we can use key to disengage or dash with our bonus action. So it should be apparent just how painful bonus actions are for monks. We have a free feature that provides a bonus action attack at level 1, but to do any of these things, we have to give that up. And these all require key. A rogue, by the way, can disengage or dash using their bonus action all day long. They can hide with a bonus action too, but the poor monk is forced to spend key to do the same thing. It doesn't really make sense. I mean, these classes got these features at the same level, and rogues get to do theirs with no resource, and monks have to use their only resource, and then it's gone in a flash. We also get unarmored movement, which increases our speed by 10 feet, and this does increase, but not that quickly. Level 6, we get an additional 5 feet of movement. We also at higher levels can do interesting things like run up walls and that kind of thing. Now, my main problem with this feature isn't that movement speed isn't useful. Movement can be really useful, but in the case of monks at level 2, we're really talking about getting in position to deliver damage that we can't really improve with feats, and that's a big problem. If monks could just use heavy weapons, and use those weapons with their martial arts attack as well, this movement speed would be huge. But since our attacks are basically forced to be on the lower spectrum for damage, it really isn't all that big a deal if we can't attack because we're too slow, since the damage isn't all that impressive to begin with. And to be clear, a monk at level 2, subpar damage is really all they can do. We get our subclass at level 3, and we'll get at least 1 feature right away. Then we get another at level 6, 11, and 17. My general assumption is that most campaigns are done by level 12, so just like with the other classes, I won't be discussing the super high level feature, as it's probably going to carry virtually no weight in the rankings. The level